Hi, I'm Ellen Ebert, and I'd like to talk about dappled light. Dappled light refers to the spotty or dappled appearance of tree shadows. I'll discuss its characteristics, how it forms, and how to paint it. Tree shadows take different forms. Shadows of the trunks result in linear patterns. Shadows of branches cause a lacy appearance, but still predominantly straight, while shadows of tree edges vary considerably, usually indicating the type of tree, like this palm tree. All of these could be called dappled light, although typically that term refers to shade caused by the foliage. Dappled light occurs when light passes through sky holes in the foliage, landing on the ground, giving a spotty appearance. What do you think is wrong with this painting I made when I was a beginner? Just look at it for a second. What is the direction of the light? Is it sunny or cloudy? No one knows because back then I didn't consider the lighting, a common beginner mistake. These are supposed to be trees, but they look like a green wall. A bird would hit his beak if he tried to fly through that. The problem is the lack of sky holes. When I photoshopped in some sky holes, the trees look more realistic and airier. This picture shows yellow sky holes in an oak tree. Not only do we see sky holes, but we also see the dark green tree. They're reciprocal. That is, the tree is the positive space and the sky holes are the negative spaces. So let's look at the sky holes in this painting. They have different sizes and shapes. Their edges are soft, so they don't stand out. And they're darker than the open sky over here, so they stay in the background. Here, I've lightened them and gave them sharp edges. This makes the sky holes stand out rather than staying in the background, so the painting appears spotty and unrealistic. So when should we use dappled light? It sets a warm, inviting mood, maybe because it reminds us of sitting under a tree on a sunny summer day. You just want to say, ah. It helps unify an image, like bringing together the bench, the path, and the rocks. It adds rhythm and patterns, usually best over simple objects without their own patterns. So let's examine this effective use of dappled light. The pattern serves as an eye path leading to the two people who are the focus of the painting. We see different round shapes and sizes of the light areas getting smaller with distance. Beams of light unify the pavement with the bushes. Notice that the colors and textures vary in the shade, but not in the light areas, making the light seem intense, as if bleaching out details and colors. I compared the values, or degrees of darkness, to the Photoshop scale, where the light areas are only about 10% black, while the dark areas are 60% black. This 50-point spread is relatively constant throughout the image, not including the soft edges. Why isn't the dappled light convincing in this painting? We don't know where the sun is located. The foliage has no sky holes and doesn't extend out to match the dappled light. The light and dark areas in the dappled light should be clearly different because one is strong sunlight and the other is shade or the absence of light. But here, the light areas vary from 20 to 30% black, while the dark areas are 50 to 80% black, which is a 20 to 60 point spread. Also, the shadows for the bench are darker than the dappled light, but all shadows should have similar values. There are too many obvious ellipses, and they shouldn't have dark centers. In fact, the center should be the lightest part. Notice how the ellipses seem to end at the orange area rather than continuing onto the blue part. In this first image showing effective use of dappled light, the light shape pattern leads us to the focus, the red coat. The red is in a spot of light, making it bright. Notice all the different sizes and shapes of the light areas getting smaller with distance. The light areas are about 30% black, while the dark areas are about 90% black, a 60-point spread, which is relatively constant. Dappled light is less effective if covering competing patterns like the feathers of the albatross bird and the chest set. It just confuses the images. Diffuse light would work better. Dappled light is also seen on tree trunks and branches. It helps indicate their form by wrapping around them. My drawing here has both dappled shade and cast shadows. Since they are both shadows blocking the light, they should have the same values or degrees of darkness as I've shown here. A common mistake is to make shadows of the spokes, like this one, darker than the dappled shade, but that would not be correct. Dappled light and shade have softer edges than the shadows of the buckets because the trees are further away than the buckets. Also, soft edges suggest the wind blowing through the leaves. Hard edges would stop that movement. You could show the foliage in addition to the shadows, creating a balanced image. Alternatively, you could show only the shadow, where the viewer is actively involved trying to determine the type of tree. A third approach is to show the dappled light falling on everything in the scene. When painting dappled light, it's often better to find the pattern of the shade, as shown in black here, so the spots of light seem connected. This often works better than drawing the ellipses. Try to find a real pattern, since it's always more believable than a made-up one. Here are some other regular light shade patterns, like the window panes, the blinds, the openings in the tunnel, and the fence. Like dappled light, these patterns are important to the images and are most effective when superimposed on relatively simple scenes. The subject becomes less important than the light itself. I'd now like to discuss the shapes of the dappled light. When light passes through a sky hole, it widens into a cone of light. Surfaces that cut through that cone, like pavement or grass, acquire round spots of light, like these cross-sections of the cone. Here, we see elliptical spots of light on the pavement. The direction, shapes, and sizes of these ellipses are determined by 5 variables: the height, shapes, and sizes of the sky holes, perspective, where ellipses get smaller with distance, the orientation of the surface with the cone of light, the viewpoint, and the location of the sun. The ellipses are affected by the height, shapes, and sizes of the sky holes. Compared to a low sky hole, a high sky hole has a spot of light that is larger with softer edges. Perspective causes the ellipses, marked in orange, to get smaller, thinner, and lighter with distance. In addition, the ellipses follow the orientation of the surface. They generally point horizontally on horizontal surfaces, diagonally on sloping surfaces, and vertically on the vertical tree trunks. The fourth factor affecting the ellipses is the viewpoint. When I look down at the spots of light, my line of sight, marked in green, is nearly parallel to the axis of the cone. In this position, the ellipses look circular. When standing on the ground, looking at the spots at an angle, they appear elliptical. And finally, ellipses are affected by the position of the sun. The yellow noontime sun shines through a sky hole, causing a circular shape on the ground. The orange evening sun shining through that same sky hole causes an ellipse. These cones are projections of the sun. This is the same principle as the pinhole camera, where the tree is projected upside down. And during a solar eclipse, if the sun has a bite taken out of it, then so do the spots of light, which I find amazing. To see the eclipse without looking at the sun, you can use the same principle by making a hole in cardboard and looking at the projection of the sun on a surface. If you think of light as a cone, then you can predict what shapes will form on various surfaces. We already saw that the shape of light on a horizontal surface becomes more elliptical as the sun goes down. Well, what happens on a vertical surface? I just turned the diagram around. Now you can see that the sun at noon is the one causing the ellipses, not the evening sun. Some artists claim that the ellipses always point at the sun on vertical structures. It's true that they point upward on such surfaces because they're following that surface. But if you look at this cone of light in relationship to the vertical wall, the ellipse could only point toward the sun if the sun were directly overhead. In this photograph, the ellipses generally point up, as shown in orange, but they can't point toward the sun because the sun is behind us. You could as easily say that dappled light on a horizontal surface points toward an evening sun. So let's review what we've learned about dappled light. It's a recognizable pattern that unifies an image, conveys a calm mood, and adds rhythm. Edges are soft because the foliage is relatively far from the surface, and soft edges indicate movement of the leaves with the wind. Sunlight travels through sky holes or gaps in the foliage, forming cones of light. A surface cutting through this cone acquires ellipses of light. These ellipses are affected by the height, size, and shape of the sky holes, perspective, the orientation of the surface, the viewpoint, and the location of the sun. They don't necessarily point toward the sun. And finally, they represent projections of the sun like the pinhole camera, so we would see crescents during a partial solar eclipse. So thanks for watching, and check out my book, The Art Instruction Course, available from most online bookstores. I provided a link to the book here. Feel free to leave public comments below or private thoughts at art.instruction.course@gmail.com. See you next time. Bye.